Okay, so make sure that you have paper out and that you are taking your notes. This is where we left off in our notes yesterday. So this says the abandonment of Reconstruction. So if you remember from yesterday, we talked about the Enforcement Acts, and that had to do with limiting the rights of the KKK because they were terrorizing African Americans and anybody who supported African Americans in the South. So you're going to try there in the South. They try to pass the Enforcement Acts and they don't really work to limit things that are happening. And so what's going to happen is that people are going to begin to realize that Reconstruction is failing and it's time to either come up with a different solution or just abandon the idea of Reconstruction altogether. Okay, so what you need to have as your title is the abandonment of Reconstruction today. We're skipping forward a little bit to the 1876 presidential election. Between that time period, or a little bit before that time period, you're going to have Ulysses S. Grant as president. He was in one of your articles from yesterday, but we're going to talk about him a little bit later, and you'll talk about him next semester. But this is the 1876 election, and you're going to have the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes. You need to go ahead and write that down. Republican candidate is Rutherford B. Hayes. The Democratic candidate is Samuel Tilden. So you see his name, Rutherford B. Hayes is the Republican candidate. Democratic candidate is Samuel Tilden. And you're going to see on this graph that Samuel Tilden is going to win the majority of the popular vote, but he is going to be somewhat short of the Electoral College vote. So he's only one vote difference in the Electoral College. And so there's going to be a little bit of a debate about who is actually going to win that election. In the South at this time, you have people that are calling themselves Redeemers, and these are Democrats. Democrats is the political party that was for slavery. They supported slavery. The Republican Party, that was Abraham Lincoln's party, are the ones who were against slavery. So the Redeemers are the Democrats in support of slavery. And now, after the Civil War and after this whole 10-year process of Reconstruction, you have the Democrats finally coming back into power. So really, things are just going back to like they were prior to the Civil War. So the Democrats are regaining control in the South. The North is starting to lose interest in African Americans. So they're starting to just kind of get bored and realize that nothing that they do is making a difference. And so they're starting to give up. And Southern states are being readmitted to the Union, so they have a lot more rights than they previously did. You're also going to have this, when this Democratic Party comes back in to dominate, it's going to be known as the Solid South. So these Redeemers, or these Democrats, are coming back in. They're gaining control of the states in the South, and they are going to just start to completely dominate it. So there's not going to be many Republicans at all. And if there are Republicans, they're going to terrorize them. They're going to kill them. So basically, they're going to do everything in their power to prevent the Republican Party from coming back into control in the South. So make sure you have copied this information. And you know, the elephant is the symbol of the Republican Party. Okay, the last thing, or the next thing, is about the end of Reconstruction is the Compromise of 1877. So we said that in the election of 1876, you had Rutherford B. Hayes, who's a Republican, and Samuel Tilden, who is a Democrat. And we said that they were tied or pretty much too closely together to figure out who actually won the election. So in order to fix this problem, you're going to have the Compromise of 1877. And this is going to be the significant moment. Star it, highlight it, whatever you need to do. This is the moment when Reconstruction is going to begin to end. Okay, and this is going to be known as the Great Betrayal. Because in the South, who would they want to win? They're going to want the Democratic candidate to win in the South, who was Samuel Tilden. However, what they are going to decide to do as a compromise is to allow Rutherford B. Hayes, who's the Republican candidate, to win if he promises to remove the troops from the South, because we said that it was divided up into 5 districts during Reconstruction where the military was in control. So Rutherford B. Hayes is going to agree to remove those troops, and he is going to say that Reconstruction laws are no longer enforced. So if you think about Reconstruction laws, what are the Reconstruction laws? Those are the things like the Enforcement Acts, which were trying to stop the KKK, the Civil Rights Act, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Obviously, they're not going to be able to bring slavery back, but it's going to be a lot less difficult or for them not to enforce the amendments. So they're going to be able to just kind of they're going to be able to tell African Americans that they can't do any of the things that they had been promised. So make sure you have that copied. Okay, so at the end of Reconstruction, the things that you're going to need to know is that the end is going to signify the election of 1876, where we just talked about Rutherford B. Hayes, Samuel Tilden. It's a very close election. And the states that were in contestment are the ones that they didn't know who had won in those states are going to be South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana. Okay, so those are going to be the ones that are going to actually decide who won the election. So we said that in response to this election, you're going to have the Compromise of 1877. Democrats agree to accept the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, if he takes troops out of the South and he ends Reconstruction. And they're going to allow the return of white rule in the South. So make sure you know that the election of 1876 leads to the Compromise of 1877. So go ahead and copy all of that information. The social and political impact on African Americans. So now that Reconstruction is ending in the South, African Americans are no longer going to be protected like they were. So for example, the 14th Amendment had been passed. So if you think it's 13th, 14th, and 15th, free men vote. So 14th gave them equal protection and citizenship. So in response to prevent them from having this equal protection or this citizenship, the South, after Reconstruction, is going to pass Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were just those laws that were passed to limit the rights of African Americans. So things that segregated them, things that prevented them from voting. The 15th Amendment is going to be the right to vote, right? So we've already talked about how poll taxes and literacy tests and intimidation by the KKK is going to prevent African Americans from being able to vote, because poll taxes is the money that they had to pay if they wanted to go vote. Literacy tests is what they're going to have to be able to prove that they can read and write if they want to go vote. And most African Americans during this time period could not read and write, especially not to the extent that they wanted them to be able to. And intimidation by the KKK, we talked about yesterday, is just showing them that if they try to go vote, then they're going to be killed or really severely hurt. And then the last thing is protection provided by the national government. This protection was provided during Reconstruction, but after Reconstruction, the federal government is going to be intimidated by the state governments, and they're not going to be able to enforce the things that they had previously said that they could. So you need to make sure you have this and you know that one leads to the other. This is a cause and effect type of thing. Okay, we've talked about scalawags a little bit. This is in your vocabulary. But these are Southern whites who are going to support Reconstruction, and they are part of the Republican Party. And they're going to be hated by many Republicans. In fact, they're so hated that they're killed, they're tortured, their houses are burned, all kinds of things. Okay, so just know that scalawags are the ones who were living in the South that supported the Republican Party. They're going to support African Americans. So we talked about, I don't know if it's the next slide or if I deleted it, but carpetbaggers are the ones who support African Americans that come from up north. Scalawags are the ones that were already in the South. So scalawag starts with the S, and South starts with an S. So make sure you know how to relate that. The next thing is Jim Crow laws, and I just mentioned this a little bit, but these are created to limit the rights of freedmen in the South. And it's basically laws that are passed by state and local governments, and it's because it's going to put the power of the state governments back into the hands of the same people that were in charge prior to the Civil War. So again, it's just like segregation of public restrooms, segregation of water fountains. Basically, they can only wash clothes for white people. They're not going to wash clothes for African Americans. Just absolutely ridiculous stuff. But you need to know that these Jim Crow laws are going to dominate the South for a long period of time. And again, more examples, just literacy tests, poll taxes, and then one that I have not gone over is the grandfather clause. So basically, you could only register to vote if your grandfather had voted. Star grandfather clause, because I haven't mentioned that a lot. And this is really important because if they're telling them that only the people whose grandfather had registered to vote could also register to vote, none of these African Americans are going to be able to vote because their grandfathers were slaves. Okay, so make sure that you understand that this is a tactic to prevent them from being able to register to vote. The next thing is Plessy versus Ferguson, and this is in 1896. Plessy is a 1/8 black man, and he was forced to ride on a black train under Louisiana state law. So he is majority white. But they are going to automatically, because he has somewhat of an African American descent, he is going to be considered a black man. And he's going to go to the Supreme Court and argue that it's unconstitutional to segregate based on race. Okay, so he's saying that he cannot be separated from white people just because he is considered black. Okay, so he is arguing against segregation. Segregation just means separation. The court is going to uphold segregation. So they're going to say that the government completely has the right to be able to say that they have to ride on separate trains. And this is going to create the separate but equal doctrine. Star that, underline it, circle it. You have to know separate but equal. Plessy versus Ferguson is separate but equal. And I'm just going to mention right here that later in the 1950s, I think, you're going to have something called Brown versus Board, and this is going to take this back. It's going to say that segregation is unconstitutional. But during this time period, segregation is completely constitutional. So they are allowed to segregate. Okay, the next thing is the long-term impact on the South. So basically, after Reconstruction is over, all of these rights are being taken away from African Americans again. So you're going to have the loss of political rights of African Americans. Are going to last for at least a good 100 years when Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all of those good people come about and start to stand up for the rights of African Americans. You're going to have the South continuing to depend on single cash crops like tobacco and cotton. You're going to have a lack of industrial development in the South, a low standard of living for most people in the South, continued racial discrimination, continued segregation, and a rise in violence against African Americans. And we went over lynchings yesterday, but make sure you write beside the word lynching that just means hanging. So that's when they are hanged. Okay, these are just a couple political cartoons to show you how people are being portrayed in the South. So you have these white men stepping on a black man. And this is to show you Southern opposition to Reconstruction. They obviously thought that African Americans were just being lazy. That's what the term idleness means. And they were just getting things for free. We've already mentioned that. Okay, so after Reconstruction and after all these redeemers are taking power again, you're going to have the New South. The Old South was based on slave labor. It was based on them being able to have slaves to work their plantation. The New South is going to be considered a growing industrial economy. So they're going to start to focus more on things that are industrial and not so much agricultural. Okay, so make sure you have all of this copied. If you have any questions, I'll be walking around. Once you are done, put your notes away and turn in your Chromebooks.